talk a little bit about how they actually grow, how they can be how those grasses can be propagated, how you can start them up, when you can start them up, and then also talk a little bit about the downsides of all of these grasses too. So year long, because this is something that people kind of tend to forget about, is that we are actually growing plants. And so all year long, there's stuff going on with these plants. Warm season grasses do have this period from about December to the beginning of March where they're dormant. They are not dead, as a lot of people like to say they are. They are actually dormant. They do still have living parts to them that eventually will regrow. But they do go off color. They are not green at this time. And I will talk about at the end of this talk how you can actually maintain a green color for them, and in a way that most people don't think you can. So coming up next month, as our temperatures start to change from very cold to get into the milder weather, as our daylight begins to lengthen, our warm seasons are going to slowly green up. Now, this is a very, very sensitive time for warm season grasses. This is the time of the year when they are going to be most susceptible to things like diseases and any kind of injury from herbicides that can often be very detrimental to them. So they kind of have to be babied during this time. One of the things we don't want to do while they are trying to green up is give them a whole bunch of extra fertilizer, trying to green them up faster than what nature is wanting them to intend. That tends to cause issues later on down the road, either with diseases or areas dying off. But as it always happens, once we hit about May into the early June, our warm seasons are going to be growing at a very rapid pace. And that's when we want to do everything we can to promote that growth. If we're going to do any cultivational practices, this is the time of year we want to do it, especially early May, June. If we're going to be changing over from one grass to another, this is the time of year we want to be thinking about doing that. This is the time of year we're going to be giving them their fertilizer, time of year that we will be most likely doing our most maintenance to them. Then comes the end of September, early October, when our temperatures start to change from the hot temperatures getting a little more mild. Our warm seasons are going to start to slow down as that daylight starts to get shorter and shorter. It'll start to harden off. At this time, again, warm season grasses become very susceptible to diseases. They also can become, again, very sensitive to the herbicides, as any kind of injury to them will not allow them any time for recovery. So we got to be very careful again at this time of year. And then once we hit the end of November, the beginning of December, when we finally get that hard frost, we're going to actually enter dormancy, and the warm season grasses will be done for the year, and we don't have to worry about them. So now I'm going to go through the different grasses, give you a little idea of what you can expect with them, tell you again a little bit about them, and go over some of their issues that they have. Starting off, I'm going to talk about Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is a very, very strong grass. Reason it is such a strong grass is it is both rhizomatous and stoloniferous. That means not only does it have pieces that are growing along the top of the surface, along the ground, those long stemmy pieces that most people tend not to like about it, but at the same time, it's got those stem pieces growing underneath the ground, searching out spots where they kind of can feel the warmth in the grass or in the ground, and pop up and start to regenerate from that area. That combination of rhizomes and stolons make it a very hardy grass, and also make it very difficult to get rid of. The other reason it can be very difficult to get rid of or even deal with is it has a very rapid growth to it. It is one of the fastest growing turf grasses that we will deal with in our area. But if you are actually promoting Bermuda grass, that is excellent. That is a quality you really want. It will actually fill in and you can establish a Bermuda grass lawn within one full growing season. Unlike a lot of your other warm season grasses that can take 2 or 3 seasons, Bermuda grass will give you that immediate satisfaction. It's a low mowing grass, so people who like to have that very well manicured look to their lawn tend to like Bermuda grass because you can mow it at 1 inch to 2 inches and it almost looks like a nice little carpet. It's also great because you have options when you're talking about what can I deal with in terms of how do I start the Bermuda grass. It has seeded varieties. It also has vegetative varieties. So you have a choice as to how you want to actually deal with it. Downside to it, it does have a higher nitrogen need. It is going to take about 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet annually. It means you're going to need to be fertilizing it relatively once a month starting May through August. So that means you're going to be having to do that more often than you will your other warm season grasses. Great thing though, few disease problems that you have to deal with. Very relative few insect problems, especially in our area. On the other hand, it will need full sun, and I'll show you in a couple of slides exactly why it absolutely needs full sun. Now, when we talk about Bermuda grass, there are 2 really types of Bermuda grass that you need to know about. There is your common Bermuda grass, which is your actual Cynodon dactylon species. This is the type of Bermuda grass that can be established from seed. This is going to be the varieties that are more wiry, that look more like your common Bermuda grass or the grass that gets into your yard or known as wild Bermuda grass. Now, through a lot of genetic breeding, there have been great improvements in common Bermuda grass. So you actually do get a wide variety of characteristics among the cultivars, but they are going to be the varieties that typically have your less desirable characteristic traits. You see here, this is going to be our common Bermuda grass. It's going to be the kind that has a much more internode spacing. It's going to be less dense than you typically see your Bermuda grasses. On the other hand, there is hybrid Bermuda grasses. People who are familiar with golf course and athletic fields know more about the hybrid Bermuda grasses. This is a Cynodon dactylon grass that's also been crossed with a Cynodon transvalensis, which is an African Bermuda grass. This is an excellent grass that has excellent turf density to it. This is what your hybrids tend to look like versus your common Bermuda grasses. They're going to have a much smaller internode spacing, which increases the amount of density they have per unit area. They also have a much smaller leaf texture. You can see the common Bermuda grass tends to have longer leaves to it, whereas your hybrids have a much smaller leaf to it, given that much finer look to it. They also tend to have darker green color when compared versus your common Bermuda grasses. So they have the more desirable traits. However, the downside is that type of cross created a species that can only be established through vegetative means. That does not mean it will not produce seed. However, the seed that your hybrid Bermuda grasses do produce is going to be sterile. And so you're going to have to establish hybrid Bermuda grasses through either plugs, sod, or through sprigging. The difference when you're looking at the two, your common Bermuda grass, now there are very high quality Bermuda grasses that are common. These are going to be your Riviera, Princess 77, Yukon. Now we've got actually Monaco is another one that I've done a lot of research with recently. These are going to be your higher quality common Bermuda grasses. The ones like Sunsport, Gold Glove, New Mex Sahara, they're going to be more like common Bermuda grass. They're going to have those characteristics that look more wild to it, whereas your Riviera and Yukon are going to have characteristics that are much more similar to your hybrid Bermuda grasses. Your Riviera and your Yukon are also going to be ones that have better cold tolerance. Your hybrid Bermuda grass, on the other hand, are going to have excellent cold tolerances compared to any of your common types. The most recent ones that we've been doing a lot of work with, Patriot, Northbridge, Latitude 36, these ones are ultra dense turf. They have incredible growing abilities. They can fill in areas very rapidly. The downside to that kind of growth nature, though, means higher maintenance. Okay? You are going to have to maintain Bermudas at a much higher clip than you would any of your other warm season grasses. That means more edging around your sidewalks, around your driveways, more edging around your flower beds. Where you don't want Bermuda to grow, it's going to take more effort to actually keep it out of there. But if you do like it, you like the soft or the finer texture to it, it is a great grass. Like I was talking about before, and when you're actually establishing Bermuda grass, it does need full sun. These are some plots that we actually were working on at the station, where we actually were trying to see the shade tolerance of some Bermuda grasses. You can see here these green plots that are in this picture. That's all St. Augustine grass, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's going to be your standard for warm season shade tolerance. Bermuda grasses, on the other hand, they cannot stand having no sunlight at all. They need sunlight. And so having it in the shade is about the only thing that will kill Bermuda grass. On the other hand, in terms of diseases, you only have to deal with 2 diseases. You have to deal with large patch, which is more or less in terms of Bermuda grass going to be an aesthetic problem. You will also have to deal with something called spring dead spot. This is a fungus that infects the roots and the stems of Bermuda grass. And while you only see what happens from it in the spring, spring dead spot is a fungus that infects in the previous fall. So to actually treat it, you need to treat the fungus in the fall, but with treatment, spring dead spot is something that is going to be very easy to manage. So when we talk about, okay, when do I actually establish Bermuda grasses? You know, the typical standard has always been you want to get and start your warm season grasses when your soil temps are about 55 to 60 degrees. Now, through some recent research, we're learning, well, that may not be right. We may need to actually start thinking about this sooner, which is why a talk on warm season grasses in February is so apropos. So Mike Richardson out of the University of Arkansas was looking at, what if I were to actually start seeding in February or March or April? How good of a stand could I get of Bermuda grass throughout the season? Because when it comes to warm season grasses, the biggest thing you want is the amount of time for it to grow in before it hits that first dormant period. You want the greatest amount of time. So if you actually get it established in March versus trying to start in May, then you're going to have an extra 2 months of growing season for that Bermuda grass. That extra maturity means a greater chance of survival when it comes to making it through winters. So what we were able to see through Mike Richardson's work, this is a photograph taken on May 19th, seeded plots of Riviera at 2 pounds per thousand and 1 pound per thousand. So 3 months, or excuse me, yes, 3 months afterwards, plots seeded in February, you don't have a whole lot of Bermuda grass there, but you do have some. You have spots growing in. And like I said with Bermuda grass will go and fill in these areas pretty quickly. March 15th, you're actually getting very high. You're up to about 70 to 80% cover. A month out, when you started in April, perhaps where it was a little bit drier, you didn't get as much coverage. And of course, plots that were seeded about 4 days prior aren't going to show that much. A whole month later, you're looking at these plots, and like I said, that extra growing month that we were talking about with 15 from the February 15th, you almost got a full cover. Same with these plots in March. Again, even the April plots are looking very, very good. Whereas again, your May 15th, if the irrigation wasn't that great, if you didn't have proper rains, you're already way behind, where these plots here, you're almost ready to grow and play on them. They're going to be fantastic. So if you are looking to actually seed Bermuda grass, I would say now start to think about it. You know, middle of the March is a great time to actually seed Bermuda grass. There was a sports and rec field manager up in Culpeper County who took a look at this work and was like, you know, I've got fields that I need to get going. I need them to look better. So he started on the 25th of March, and this is in Culpeper, Virginia. So we're talking, you know, 2 to 3 hours northwest of here, much, much colder. They were actually able to seed on the 25th of March. Now, the thing that you do have to do when you are thinking about these winter seedings, and what we found to be incredibly effective, you need to cover it with compost after you seed it. Covering it with the compost provides a nice warm blanket. The black compost will actually heat up the soil faster than if there was just the soil there alone. It also provides a nice nutrient source for that seed right there at the surface. So started these on March 25th, looking about 3 weeks later, we're starting to see growth happening. We're looking at, you know, the 13th of April, which is when we're talking about Bermuda grass growth. Typically, we don't think, you don't even start that until May, yet you already have seedlings growing up. This was that same field, 29th of May. This is without any supplemental irrigation, just natural rainfall. Was able to get this field up and going about 2 months later. And a month after that, they're mowing it. They're actually playing sports on it. So this is the kind of thing, if you're thinking about switching over to Bermuda grass, now would be the time to start thinking about that. The great thing also about Bermuda grass, even if you're not thinking about, okay, doing this with seed, maybe I want to do it with plugs, or maybe I want to do it with sod, or even sprigging or stolonizing. That can be done now too. The same guy did some more research with dormant sprigging, where he actually put sprigs of Bermuda grass into the ground, and he was able to be very successful. The key to that was covering it with the compost. Okay, now we're going to talk about zoysia grass. Zoysia grass is my absolute favorite grass in terms of the way it looks, the way it feels, how it grows. It is just an excellent grass. Why do I think it's so great? One, just like Bermuda grass, it is rhizomatous and stoloniferous. It has these very nice little stolons here that are going to grow underneath or along the top of the ground, and they'll have these rhizomes growing up in the ground, popping up their little shoot pieces. So it's going to fill in an area. Unlike Bermuda grass, which had a very high nitrogen requirement at 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year, zoysia has a typically low one. You only need about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds to maintain a healthy zoysia grass stand. Like Bermuda grass, you also have seeded and vegetative varieties. They also have a variety of leaf textures to it, kind of like Bermuda did. Your typical zoysias are going to have a much thicker leaf texture to them, something closer to a tall fescue, but there are some very finer leafed zoysia grasses that are closer to Bermuda grass. When you're talking about cold tolerance, worrying about winter kill, zoysia grass is excellent. It has the best winter kill resistance out of any warm season grass, has the best cold tolerance. In fact, they grow zoysia grass up through Indiana, Ohio, and even northern parts of Pennsylvania. They've got stands of zoysia grass. It does great in no matter what environment it is. Unlike Bermuda grass, which can't handle the shade, zoysia grass also has one of the highest shade tolerances compared to any of the warm season grasses. So it can handle a bit of trees over top of it and still maintain a healthy stand. The downside to zoysia grass, though, is it's very slow growing. Where Bermuda grass is incredibly fast growing, you'll get a stand of Bermuda grass within 1 year. Zoysia grass is going to take some time. It's not going to happen within one growing season. It's going to take a couple of growing seasons. And it's going to take a lot of upfront work to make zoysia grass, get a very good stand of zoysia grass. However, that upfront work is going to be rewarded in tenfold in the work that you have to do later on. The other downside to zoysia grass is the one disease it's very, very susceptible to is large patch. Unlike Bermuda grass, where large patch was mostly just a cosmetic issue, in zoysia grass, it can actually be very detrimental because of that slow growing nature. Zoysia, the types of varieties that you're going to be dealing with in terms of zoysia japonica, which is your most common zoysia grass. The most common one you're going to be able to find is going to be Myers zoysia. This is the original zoysia grass that was brought over from Asia and is spread throughout the southeastern areas and now actually has stuff growing up into the north. You'll have to see many of your sod industry or sod businesses will have a variety of others other than Meyer. They might have Palisades, some might have Empire, some might have Jamor. It depends on who you go through. Zenith, that variety is going to be your only variety that is going to be your seeded variety. And I'll talk a little bit in just a few slides about what is required to actually seed zoysia grass, but there is a seeded variety if you want to establish from seed. Zoysia matrella is a much finer textured zoysia grass, whereas zoysia japonica is that nature or that texture that's closer to tall fescue. Zoysia matrella is going to be closer to Bermuda grass, a much finer bladed zoysia grass. And the best variety that we've worked with is going to be Xeon, but there are some other varieties. And then they've actually hybridized these two with Emerald. What does zoysia grass actually, when it gets large patch, look like? Well, it looks like a very large patch of grass dying off. And you typically can know when that's happening. It's going to have this orangish or this yellowish ring growing around it. Okay. That's going to be your big indication you have an active large patch. And that's when you're going to want to actually treat it. When are you going to typically see these? You're going to see these in those transition periods when they're coming out of dormancy and when they're going into dormancy. Depending on how much rainfall we get at those time periods, how cool the temperatures stay, will really affect how aggressive the large patch is going to be on the grass. So you need to really pay attention during those times. The great thing is, now, if you have zoysia grass or another grass that is susceptible to large patch, there is a product out there that Scotts has put on the market that is highly effective for treating large patch. That is going to be the product is called Disease EX. The active ingredient in that is going to be azoxystrobin. And it's going to be, when you see this yellowish ring, when you see that orangish ring going around it, that's when you want to put that product out. Applying that product at that time will almost eliminate large patch in any of your warm season grasses. In terms of zoysia establishment, here's a couple of pictures, some plots that we had out at the station. These were 2 pounds of zoysia grass per 1,000 square feet. We seeded them on June 10th. This was 3.5 months after we seeded them. You can see that we do not have 100% establishment. And that's the thing. You're not going to see it that first full year. It's going to take a couple of years to establish. With these plots, it took probably 3 to 4 herbicide applications and quite a bit of fertility to get them going. And we were able to get about 60%, 60 to 70% cover within that full year. Second year took a little bit more, but after 2 years, so this is the following December. These plots were started, as you can see, in June of 2008. December of 2009, we had 100% coverage, and our plots were looking very, very clean, because that's the great thing about zoysia grass. Zoysia grass is going to be so thick and so healthy that it will outcompete most weeds. In the following year, 2 years after we actually seed it, we've got a nice healthy stand of zoysia grass that requires only 1 herbicide application, a good pre-emergent in the springtime, to actually keep things looking good, and very little fertility. So it is possible to get zoysia from seed. It's possible to get it also from plug, sod, but it is going to take time. It's not going to be as rapid as Bermuda grass. But like I said, that patience, the 2 years of hard work is going to pay off, because in the end, you're not going to have to maintain it as much as you will your Bermuda grass. You won't have to fertilize it as much, and it will actually help hold off weeds much, much better than your Bermuda grass will. St. Augustine grass is another warm season that's actually very, very popular in our area, especially if you've ever been to some of the older neighborhoods in Norfolk. A lot of those areas that have very tall trees, a lot of pine trees in them, have a lot of St. Augustine in them. St. Augustine is another great grass, but unlike tall zoysia grass and Bermuda grass, it's going to be only stoloniferous. Means all of its pieces are going to be growing above ground. There are no pieces growing underneath the ground to fill in those areas. It will fill in areas right along the top. Now, it does fill in those areas very, very quickly. It has very fast establishment. It's got growth that is much like Bermuda grass. It goes along that top, pegs down, and just keeps on going. So areas get filled in very quickly. That growth, you start St. Augustine plugs in middle or the beginning of April, beginning of May. By the end of August, you definitely will have a nice stand of St. Augustine grass. Among warm season grasses, it is going to have the greatest shade tolerance. You saw in that picture for the Bermuda grass, the green grass that was growing in that shaded environment under heavy oak shade is going to be St. Augustine grass. Like I said, the older neighborhoods that have a lot of trees in them in Norfolk have St. Augustine, and it has thrived in those areas. Among your warm season grasses, it does have the greatest mowing height, and it needs that really tall mowing height. It likes to be mowed about 3.5 to 4 inches. With that great height, you need to really watch how low you go. It does not like to be mowed very low. If you get down to about 1 inch or 2 inches, St. Augustine needs that extra leaf area to be able to photosynthesize much better than you would actually, than your Bermuda grass does. So it needs to be mowed higher. Low nitrogen needs, it only needs about 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So it's along the same lines as zoysia grass. So it's great that you don't have to fertilize it a whole lot. You know, tell people 3/4 of an of nitrogen in per 1,000 square feet in June, another 3/4 in August, and you're going to actually have all the fertilizer that St. Augustine needs in a year. Downside to St. Augustine, among warm season grasses, it does have a very high disease susceptibility. It is going to be susceptible to large patch. And then it's also is very susceptible to gray leaf spot. And I'll show you some pictures here coming up on what that's going to look like and why we typically see that a whole lot. Also, St. Augustine grass has a very low herbicide tolerance. Much of your herbicides that people use for controlling broadleafs, things like clover, chickweed, ground ivy, wild violet, you know, things that usually are controlled with Ortho Weed Be Gone, any of those products. All of those active ingredients are very, very dangerous in St. Augustine. It has a susceptibility to those herbicides and a much lower tolerance than you have on any of your other warm season grasses like zoysia grass or Bermuda grass or any of your cool season grasses. So you got to be very, very careful what herbicides you actually put on St. Augustine. However, the great thing is all of your herbicide labels are going to have right on the label which ones they can actually spray it on. So reading the label of your herbicides is an excellent way to make sure you're not going to be causing any harm to your turf grass. And then because it is only stoloniferous, because its growing pieces are staying on top of the ground, it is much more susceptible to winter kill, has a questionable cold tolerance. If we tend to get very, very cold in our areas, we can lose quite a bit of St. Augustine. This year, we don't have to worry as much. We have not gotten as cold as we have in previous winters, but some winters where we do drop down into the teens, if we do not have snowfall on the ground, St. Augustine can be damaged very severely. And I'll show you a picture here in a few slides. The other thing you got to worry about with St. Augustine is going to be chinch bugs. These are only affect St. Augustine, and they affect it actually when it's very, very hot. Chinch bugs are bugs that will grow down into the crown of St. Augustine, and when it gets really, really hot, it tends to sap all the juices out of them and then move out away from very hot places. Other issue with St. Augustine, like I said, it's questionable cold tolerance. Problem you have is like this picture in the center here, you know, you may have put down a pre-emergent herbicide and all of a sudden you have all these areas that are getting our winter kill, because when do you put out your pre-emergent herbicides? You put them out in March. Well, St. Augustine is not greening up yet in March. So what can happen is as it tries to grow out and peg down, those pre-emergent herbicides are what are called root inhibitors. And you're going to see things like these clubbed roots here. And what those clubbed roots will do, they'll have dysfunction to them. And then whatever pieces that the St. Augustine is growing out on will not peg down and be able to uptake roots. And so they kind of die off and they're not as healthy. That's a big issue with St. Augustine that you got to be very wary of and think about as you go to put down pre-emergent herbicides. The other thing, gray leaf spot, this is kind of what I was talking about. Gray leaf spot, it forms like little diamonds that spread out across as it grows. This is a disease that starts to affect St. Augustine at the end of June as we get kind of hot and very wet, and continues to affect it all the way through August. Problem with gray leaf spot I have seen is people who tend to fertilize St. Augustine much too early are the ones causing the most issues. People who are putting down, you know, weed and feeds or fertilizer and pre-emergent applications in March and early April, they're trying to jumpstart that St. Augustine. Well, that early fertilizer makes it much more susceptible come June for these kinds of diseases. So you gotta wait for your fertilizer applications. You can put down your pre-emergents, but make sure it's just pre-emergents, not pre-emergents and fertilizers, or else putting down fertilizers too early, you're going to make it more susceptible to diseases. These is a nice picture of some plots we have out at the station. These are St. Augustine plots that we are growing for evaluation. It's much different, many varieties of St. Augustine. Now, we started these in June of 2016. By 2017, you can see we had very nice green plots of St. Augustine. They were all growing incredibly well. Now, between 2016 and 2017, we actually had a very cold winter. There was a period of time where we went almost a week and a half in January where our temperatures were in the 20s and into the teens. However, when we had that period, we had snow cover over top of it. Snow cover tends to actually act as a thermal blanket, limiting how any kind of temperature differentials in the air, which can be detrimental to things like St. Augustine. Between 2017 and 2018, we got the same kind of cold temperatures, but we did not have the snow cover that we did. And so those varieties that don't have great cold tolerance to them, you can see were checked out. In fact, a lot of them just did not come back. That being said, that's why this particular variety right here, this is something called Raleigh. Raleigh is a St. Augustine that was established out of NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. It has an excellent cold tolerance and is a variety that has always shown to be incredibly good for our area. So if you're thinking about switching over to St. Augustine, or if you have St. Augustine and need to get, you know, want to beef up an area, I would say make sure you're actually getting Raleigh. That's going to be something that is going to be beneficial to you. Centipede grass. Centipede grass is what we like to call lazy man's grass. It is the grass that if you want a semi-decent looking grass, one that will grow, you'll have to mow it every once in a while, but you really don't want to do a whole lot to it. You don't want to put a lot of fertilizer on it. You don't want to mow it every single week. You just kind of want to let it do its thing and get it and grow into an area. That's what centipede grass is going to be. Like St. Augustine, it is only stoloniferous, so its cold tolerance is going to be right along the same lines as centipede grass or as St. Augustine grass. Unlike St. Augustine grass, centipede is very slow growing. It has the growth nature of your zoysia grass. It will fill in an area, but it's going to take multiple years to get there. It's not going to be something you can push. In fact, its nitrogen needs are the lowest of any of your grasses. It needs at most 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, which usually can be taken care of in one application per year. Any more than that, it tends to actually outgrow itself and it becomes detrimental to the centipede grass. So you need to limit how much nitrogen it actually gets. Like your Bermuda grass and your zoysia grass, it does have seeded and vegetative varieties. The most popular being Tiff Blair, which can actually be gotten by seed, as well as is the most common sod variety. But like St. Augustine, it is disease susceptible and it does have those same low herbicide tolerance. So you have to be really careful about what herbicides you're putting on centipede grass. This grass, like I said, it's going to be one that is going to be what you want if you don't want to put a lot of work into it. It's not going to look as good as your zoysia grass or your Bermuda grass or even your St. Augustine, but it's not going to take a lot of work either. Downside, like I said, it is susceptible to large patch like most of your warm season grasses. And like with zoysia grass, when it gets infected and begins to look like this, that becomes very detrimental because it's not going to fill in itself. That area is going to be filled in by weeds, by Bermuda grass, by something else that will overtake that area. And so it needs to be treated and dealt with. How do you tell the difference between St. Augustine and centipede grass? Because often if the centipede is left to get kind of thick, or the St. Augustine is a little malnourished and it looks real thin, you can look by just looking at the arrangement between the two. St. Augustine grass at every single node space is going to have 2 blades of grass coming off at every single node. We like to call that the adjacent stacking, okay? Whereas centipede grass, you only get 1 blade going on opposite sides at every single node spacing. This is either an opposite arrangement or an alternating arrangement. So centipede grass alternates, St. Augustine stays adjacent. And so you can tell those apart. If you've got an area that has maybe one or the other, you can now tell them apart. Final grass that I'm going to talk about is going to be seashore paspalum. Seashore paspalum is relatively new, although it's been growing down south for quite a many years. We have only recently started to bring it up into the Virginia Beach, the Hampton Roads area, trying to test its limits of cold tolerance. Why we kind of like it so much, it is rhizomatous and stoloniferous, so it has a very aggressive growth habit, very much like Bermuda, has a very Bermuda-like density to it, that very small internode spacing, very fine leaf texture to it. Difference between Bermuda and seashore paspalum is one, Bermuda, when you kind of rub your hand over top of Bermuda, it's going to have a kind of rough nature to it. Whereas seashore paspalum, our plots that when you rub your hands over top of that, it's a very soft, fine leaf to it. It doesn't have that rough nature that a lot of your warm seasons have. It's a very softer texture to it. The other great thing about seashore paspalum that is very good for our area, it has an extremely high salt tolerance. In fact, it has the highest salt tolerance among any of your grasses, warm season or cool season. In fact, this is why a lot of areas down in South Carolina along the coast, on Kiowa Island, and then places on the West Coast and in Hawaii have a lot of seashore paspalum because they can actually irrigate seashore paspalum with salt water. It is that salt tolerant that it will stand salt water being used to irrigate it, and it will not harm it. Does like to be low mowed like Bermuda grass, so anywhere from 1/2 inch to 2 inch. Homeowners, we typically want people mowing at about 2 inches. You do have seeded and vegetatively propagated varieties. Sea Isle and Sea Isle 2000 are both the seeded varieties. And then very good vegetatively propagated are going to be Sea Isle Supreme and Sea Spray. These are all varieties that we've tested and we've seen actually do very well in our area. Downsides to it, poor cold tolerance. Like I said, we are still testing it. That Sea Isle 1, Sea Isle Supreme, and what was the other one? Sea Isle 2000. Those are varieties that we've seen have cold tolerance and be able to withstand the colder temperatures of our area. Seashore paspalum does have pretty poor disease tolerance, though, among warm season grasses. It gets dollar spot, it gets the large patch, it gets the leaf spot pretty badly. So it is going to be something that needs to be kind of babied. Take a little more fungicide help to keep it going. Does have that high nitrogen requirement, that 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet that we talked about with Bermuda grass. So there is going to be a higher maintenance need to it. There's also the limited herbicide usage. Not so much the same that we saw with St. Augustine and centipede grass. Now we're talking more along the lines of some of your grassy herbicides, things that you can typically use on Bermuda grass or zoysia grass to get rid of things like crabgrass, yellow nutsedge, goosegrass. Those types of herbicides are going to be detrimental to seashore paspalum, so we can't use those. We got to find other herbicides that will actually handle or can be used on seashore paspalum. So, but again, there are herbicides you can use on it. You just need to go ahead and read the label. So, final thing I want to talk about, you know, the big detractor that's typically seen with warm season grasses is our cold temperatures make them go, warm season grasses go dormant. And most people do not like the brownish, the tannish, the grayish look that that warm seasons get. So question's always been, well, what can we do? Now, most people think, well, I'll just overseed it. Well, some people don't like overseeding it. And we, as far as warm season grasses go, the only one we recommend being overseeded is going to be Bermuda grass, because the ryegrass that we recommend can actually be a detriment to things like St. Augustine, zoysia grass, as they're trying to come out of dormancy. So what can we do that's environmentally friendly to actually achieve that green? One thing we've talked about is actually spraying your grass. So this was a home up in Williamsburg that was sprayed in 2009. This is what it looked like right before they actually sprayed it. You can see the dormant nature to it. There is a little bit of green still in there, so it hasn't gone completely dormant, but it's pretty darn close. This is what it looked like immediately after spraying. So when you compare this, you look at it, compare it to the neighbors, it actually has that green look that you want with it, that darker green color to it. So then the question is, well, how long is that going to last? Am I going to have to continually spray this over the winter? Is this some new maintenance thing I have to do? So this is what it looked like 4 months after being sprayed. It still has that green kind of nature to it. And you can even see in the background that even cool season grasses, when you get extremely cold, you get frost after frost after frost, can get a yellowish kind of look to it. Well, that's not going to happen if you actually spray paint your lawn. And some of our research that we've done has shown that actually painting a warm season lawn actually greens it up about 2 weeks faster than it would if you did not have it. And it looks better as it's transitioning. You don't have those tannish, brownish stems kind of intermingled as it's starting to pop out. Everything just kind of looks green. And this is what you kind of see at this point. As it's starting to really green up, you can see the neighbors are green, but you're green as well. And at the beginning of April, you have a nice green lawn that stayed there the entire year. So it is possible to achieve a green lawn even with a warm season grass all year long. It just takes a little bit of paint into it. So that is all I have on warm season grasses at this time. So I'm gonna kill my slideshow and open us up to questions at this time.
Hi, Adam. I've got a series of questions people have asked as we went along.
Okay.
First one was, what pre-emergence work best?
So the unfortunate downside for homeowners, okay, the only pre-emergents that are allowed to be put on lawns are ones that are in the root inhibiting class. These are things like prodiamine, pendimethalin, dithiopyr. Those are what often come in combination with fertilizers. They're also the ones, Scott's Holtz, is or pendimethalin. All of those are going to be root inhibitors. And so you really, when it comes to warm season management, you do have to make a decision. Okay. Has it been cold enough that I have to worry about winter kill, or is it, do I take the chance and put out my pre-emergence? And if I do get winter kill, well, then I know my grass isn't going to recover the same as if it wasn't. So as far as those three go, if I were to order those three from best pre-emergent to weakest pre-emergent, I would say prodiamine is going to be the best pre-emergent, followed by pendimethalin, and then dithiopyr.
Next question. What time is the best time of year to put down lime on St. Augustine?
So lime can be put down any time of the year. It does not matter what time of year it is. If your soil test, and hopefully you're putting down lime because you have a soil test that states you have a need for the lime. And if you do have that, any time of the year will be good for it. That is something that can be done in the middle of the winter, and any kind of rain that we get, hopefully not like we have been having, will allow it to start to actually work its way down into the soil. And you want it to get further down in the soil as possible, because surface applied lime is going to take a couple of months to work its way and get a full effect of what you would want with a surface with lime applied directly to the surface.
How can I control a small patch 3 feet by 2 feet oblong of Discandra that seems to be taking over the St. Augustine in my lawn? That spot does get a lot of foot traffic.
So if you've got Dichondra in there, the other thing you're going to probably, that area is going to stay kind of wet, I would assume. And the best thing you can, best thing for that, there is, well, one, try to get the water away from it. And then, because you're not going to be able to use things like triclopyr or 2,4-D. You can use, if you can find a product that is just pure dicamba, or a product called Celsius. Celsius is one that you might be able to find on Amazon. It is one that is a broadleaf killer, but it's not one that's going to be a one and done kind of deal. It's going to take multiple applications, probably 3, maybe even 4 applications to actually take care of the Dichondra. Because that one is very difficult to control, even when you can use things like 2,4-D or triclopyr.
You said 2 pounds of fertilizer. What kind of fertilizer? And the second question from this person is, how close do I mow zoysia? It seems like if I mow close, it gives more sun and bare dirt to sprout crabgrass.
So zoysia should be mowed about 2.5 to 3 inches is where I would mow zoysia. It like the thicker nature, the thicker leaf texture likes it a little bit taller. So not all the way down to Bermuda height, which is 2 inches or below, but not all the way up to St. Augustine, which is 3.5 to 4. You want it right there in the middle. And what was the second part of the question?
You said 2 pounds of fertilizer. What kind of fertilizer?
So when it comes to fertilizer, it depends on whether or not, one, can you water it in right away? And how long or how much you are actually trying to put down. Fertilizers come in a multitude of varieties. Everything from fast relief, things like urea that are 46% nitrogen, all the way down to chicken manure, which is going to be something that's very, very slow release, which is only about 5% nitrogen. Good thing about the urea, you don't have to put down as much to get that, get up to that 2 pounds. Now, when I say 2 pounds, I typically, you don't want to put all 2 pounds down at once. You do want to split that up between 2 to 3 applications, depending on what kind you're using. The faster source you're using, the smaller amounts of actual fertilizer you want to use, as they can tend to burn, especially if you don't have an irrigation system. If it is a slower release, which every bag of fertilizer has to tell you, one, what type of nitrogen they're using, the percentage of the nitrogen that's in there, and the method of nitrogen, whether it's fast acting or water insoluble. So if you're using a more water insoluble nitrogen, then you can put out more, and it's going to last you longer. You'll see more, it spread out over more of a period of time. The faster sources are going to, you want to use less of it, but you may need more applications.
How many coats of paint were applied, and what kind of paint is it?
So this particular one, it was a product called Green Longer. There is some research out of NC State done by the professor down there, Grady Miller. There is a wide variety of paints which actually have different colors ranges to them, from very, very dark green to a much lighter shade of green, and even some of them kind of have a bluish green color to them. That particular application was one application. They may have gone over it 2 times to get there, but it was only one application.
And one last question, what's the best grass for big dogs?
Dogs are always going to be grass's worst friend. They may be man's best friend, and as you saw from my picture, I love dogs. I do have small dogs, but I grew up with big dogs. But big dogs apply an incredible amount of force as they run around, and they are very, very difficult to maintain lawns, especially in certain areas, because dogs create paths that they run. And in those paths, it's very difficult to maintain it just because of their constant tracking over those areas. So they create a very compact area. What I would recommend is, Bermuda is going to have the fastest recovery out of it, but Bermuda among your warm season grasses tends to wear down pretty quickly. Zoysia does not wear down as quickly, but it does not recover the same. St. Augustine is going to be one that has the greatest amount of wear tolerance and the greatest amount of shade, but there you do have to worry a little bit more about the cold tolerance aspect to it. It all depends on the situation that you're in.
Okay, Susan, I'm turning it back over to you.
So there's a bunch of questions in did I get most of them?
Yeah, there's a few, but it's after 8, so I sort of cut it off.
Okay. If you plan to lime prior to planting Bermuda, should you also till in fertilizer prior to seeding? I would till in the lime. I would not till in the fertilizer. The lime, you do want more spread throughout the soil. The fertilizer, especially if you're starting Bermuda from seed, you do want those nutrients right where the seed, it's going to be available to the seed, which for the seed is going to be right there at the surface. Large bags of Bermuda, you can go to, there's a place in Norfolk called Site 1. And there used to be a place in Chesapeake called Turf and Garden. I believe it is now called Horizon. They've recently changed names, and I will get back to that on the exact name of that. Do you need to aerate zoysia or other warm season grasses? The only time you really want to aerate any area is if you've determined that you have compacted soils. Easiest way to tell if you have compacted soil is take a screwdriver when the area is moist. And by moist, I mean it's not soaking wet, but it's also not bone dry. It's somewhere in between. If you can press that screwdriver down with your thumb, just your thumb, not your full hand, just your thumb, your area is not compacted to where you have to aerate. But on the other hand, with all of these grasses, you are going to have thatch created. So about every 3 to 4 years, depending on your maintenance, you are going to need to verticut them. Verticutting is a machine that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those places where you can rent power equipment. What that is going to do, that's going to cut up that thatch in that thatch layer. It will create a lot of debris that will need to be cleaned up. But great thing about warm season grasses is that debris, if you do have a weaker area, you can collect that debris because it's like getting free stolons, which are growing points. You can spread it over a weak area, baby that weak area, and actually that area will grow from there. So that's the great thing about warm season grasses. They tend to produce their own growing material. As far as when do you need to dethatch, you want to do that late May, early June, because you do want to make sure it has the most amount of time to recover. You know, any cultivational practices just by nature is a detrimental, does some kind of detriment to the grass. It's kind of like, you know, cutting your hair or I don't have a good analogy for that one, but it does do harm to the plant, but it's necessary harm. As far as the pre-emergence, you can look onto the extension website. There is a pest management guide that has all of those in there, all of the pre-emergence in there. Does the lawn paint and hide disease or other issues you may have with the lawn? In my experience with painting, and it does not. You can still tell where you see a large patch, where you see things like spring dead spot. So there's a lush ride lawn in the winter, but wind up with a brown dust bowl yard in warm season. So thank you for the info. Hopefully we can overcome. I hope you can as well.
Okay, Susan. You're on mute, Susan.
Now I'm not. I'm back. Adam, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. And for the rest of you, if you enjoyed this, please tell a friend and join us on Monday, March 22nd at 7 p.m. when John Wilson will be talking about the urban vegetable gardening. The Zoom link for that program can be found at bbgh.org website. Hope to see you all on the 22nd, and thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Adam.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and the handouts were fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.